Is there anything more subjective than judging writing? Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I am going to attempt to kind of highlight some examples of things that I think are really good examples of writing, hopefully of different types of writing, but that there's a kind of writing that speaks to us. For me, it's a writing that's rich in images, that pays attention to the rhythm of words and sentences and their arrangement in a way which creates kind of a beautiful effect, which I'm not even sure I can accurately describe. So what I decided to do was to make this video and give 10 examples of books that I think contain really beautiful writing. Yeah, I think there's something fairly unique about all the writers whose books I'm going to read from. Some of these are books that you've heard me talk about many times before, some of them relatively new, and there is a little bit of recency bias probably involved in some of this based on what I was reading in August. But the first book I want to talk about is Cold Enough for Snow by the Australian author Jessica Au. I read this book a couple of years ago. I think I read it for Shorty in September, which is coming up, and I was really just blown away by the writing itself, by the images it created, by the emotional impact of the words, and I just thought there's something really beautiful about the way these sentences are written and the way those sentences go together to create images. So what I'm going to do with every one of the books is I'm going to read an example to give you some idea of what I think of as beautiful writing or great writing from each of these. So to begin with this reading from Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. The fabrics were hanging in a long room such that you could look at all of them at once or each on its own. Some were small, but some were so large that their tails draped and ran over the floor like frozen water, and it was impossible to imagine them being worn or hanging in any room but this one. Their patterns were at once primitive and graceful, and as beautiful as the garments in a folk tale. Looking at the translucency of the overlapping dyes reminded me of looking upward through a canopy of leaves. They reminded me of the seasons, and in their bare, visible threads of something lovely and honest that had now been forgotten, a thing we could only look at but no longer live. I felt at the same time mesmerized by their beauty and saddened at this vague thought. I just think that's incredibly beautiful and powerful. Maybe not the absolute most original idea to compare hanging fabrics to leaves and looking up through them. Just something I really thought was beautiful. A beautiful example of that, and the book is filled with passages that impacted me that way. Second writer I want to talk about today is a writer who we just got finished with, or just finishing Faulkner in August, and that is we were reading As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And I think that a lot of times when people talk about William Faulkner, they really only think about the complexity of kind of his hardest or most difficult novels to read, things like Absalom, Absalom, or The Sound of the Fury. And one of the things I think a lot of people forget is that Faulkner was a good writer of all kinds of things. He's good at conveying emotion with very few words. He's as good at Hemingway of letting you know what the subtext is without necessarily telling you out loud or telling you directly. He's also pretty good at describing action, so I thought I would read this scene from As I Lay Dying, which I think is just really, really well done. The wagon hung for a long time while the current built up under it, shoving it off the ford, and Cash leaning more and more, trying to keep the coffin braced so it wouldn't slip down, and finished tilting the wagon over. As soon as the wagon got tilted good to where the current could finish it, the log went on. It headed around the wagon and went on good as a swimming man could have done. It was like it had been sent there to do a job and done it and went on. When the mules finally kicked loose, it looked for a minute like maybe Cash could get the wagon back. It looked like him and the wagon wasn't moving at all, and just Jewel fighting that horse back to the wagon. Then that boy passed me, running and hollering at Darrell, and the gal trying to catch him, and then I see their mules coming, rolling slow up out of the water, their legs spraddled stiff like they had balked upside down, and roll on into the water again. Then the wagon tilted over, and then it and Jewel and the horse was all mixed up together. Cash went out in sight, still holding the coffin braced. Then I couldn't tell anything for the horse lunging and splashing. I thought that Cash had give up then and was swimming for it, and I was yelling at Jewel to come back, and then all of a sudden him and the horse went under too, and I thought they was all going. I knew that the horse had got dragged off the ford too, and with that wild drowning horse and that wagon and that loose box, it was going to be pretty bad. And there I was, standing knee-deep in the water, yelling at ants behind me. See what you've done now? See what you've done now? So that's just a great scene. I think it gives you a good idea of how good Faulkner is at describing action. And one of the things I think is best about that is this is, you know, if you've read As I Lay Dying, you'll know that, that a lot of the chapter told from the point of view of lots of different characters is one of the real geniuses of the story. But I really think that one of the things that I like best about that scene I just described is how Faulkner's able to put himself into the mind of this man named Tull, who is, you know, perhaps a little bit better educated than the Bundrans, who the story concerns. And so you see that his accent, his dialect from the South is a lot more subtle, maybe, than you might expect from someone else. And I just thought that was just brilliant. I said on this channel before, I think the greatest example of stream of consciousness writing is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And I think that's true, and it's because stream of consciousness is difficult to capture in a short section. I'm not sure this exactly does it, but this is one of the passages in the book, a short passage from the book, that I thought was really affecting. And we're in the mind of Clarissa Dalloway, who is giving a party. Famously, that's what Mrs. Dalloway concerns. And so this is her looking in a mirror just before getting dressed. How many million times had she seen her face, and always with the same imperceptible contraction? She pursed her lips when she looked in the glass. It was to give her face point. That was herself, pointed, dart-like, definite. That was herself, when some effort, some call on her to be herself, drew the parts together. She alone knew how different, how incompatible, and how composed, so for the world only into one center, one diamond, one woman, who sat in her drawing room and made a meeting point, a radiancy no doubt in some dull lives, a refuge for the lonely to come to, perhaps. She had helped young people who were grateful to her. She had tried to be the same always, never showing a sign of all the other sides of her faults, jealousies, vanities, suspicions, like this of Lady Broughton not asking her to lunch, which she thought, combing her hair finally, is utterly base. Now, where was her dress? I just think that's a really powerful brief description of a woman looking at herself and realizing that she has to live her life a certain way in public to mask, you know, who she is, all the insecurities, all the slight she feels, etc. In writing. I just think that's really well done. Well documented here on my channel that one of my favorite books recently, or set of books I guess, as they're published in the United States, is Septology by Fosse. He has a particular type of writing which is called slow writing, I believe, which I just find really beautiful. Now, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people pick these books up and it just doesn't work for them. And this is kind of that subjectivity of writing. But I think there's something unique about a style of writing, and I'm not sure I can find a passage that captures it. I looked, you know, to see if I could find one which really gives a sense of how it works. And I couldn't find the exact one I was looking at, but I think the opening passage of the first book of the Septology, the first paragraph of Septology, does a pretty good job. So I thought I'd read that one to you, give you some idea of the writing style and how it goes. And, you know, slow writing here for Fosse is kind of like stream of consciousness itself, but there's something different about it, even though I think you're going to see some connection between this and what I just read from Virginia Woolf. So this is from the first book of the Septology by Fosse. And I see myself standing and looking at the picture with the two lines that cross in the middle, one purple line, one brown line. It's a painting wider than it is high, and I see that I've painted the line slowly. The paint is thick, two long wide lines, and they've dripped. Where the brown line and purple line cross, the colors blend beautifully and drip, and I'm thinking this isn't a picture, but suddenly the picture is the way it's supposed to be. It's done. There's nothing more to do on it, I think. It's time to put it away. I don't want to stand here at the easel anymore. I don't want to look at it anymore, I think. And I think today's Monday, and I think I have to put this picture away with the other ones I'm working on, but am not done with. The canvases on stretchers leaning against the wall between the bedroom door and the hall door, under the hook with the brown leather shoulder bag on it, the bag where I keep my sketch pad and pencil. So it's kind of, you know, a lot of run-on sentences with commas, but I think that's a pretty good idea of how this works and how the main character, Osley, is in his head thinking all these things. And I'm not sure any stream of consciousness gets perfectly the process by which people are thinking about things, but I like the way that Fosse does it there. One of the most recent books I've read, and I already read an example from this book of what I just thought was extraordinary writing, was Mammoth by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanches. By the way, I think this is the only I have two translated works here. when I compliment the writing of a writer who writes in a language other than English, I'm also complimenting the translation, which I think, you know, is a real trick to clearly, you know, transfer a writer's thoughts from one language into another. In this case, Baltasar's story is translated from Catalan into English. And I think the writing of this book is extraordinary. You know, if you watch my channel, that Boulder is one of my favorite books of recent memory. I think I say that about every other video now. I used to say I said every third video, now I think of every other. And, you know, Mammoth for me isn't as good of a book because I didn't identify as much with the character, or I didn't feel the same connection, maybe is a better way of saying it, with the main character. But I think the writing here stands out and shines above everything else. So I thought, again, I would read a selection from that, from Mammoth by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanches. The biscuits are almond clusters dribbled in chocolate. They're sublime. They must be expensive, and I hate that I like them as much as I do. Fucking shepherd. I insist that he try one, but he turns me down, saying he doesn't want to risk his molars rotting. I tell him they're probably all rotten through by now. He nods and then says he's proud to still have a full set of teeth, especially given he's never been to the dentist. This is when he lays out his method for me, and I fall at his feet. When your teeth start to hurt like hell, when your cheek is swollen, it's so swollen it looks like a pig's jowl, when the pain feels like a rod of molten metal jabbing you from the inside, that's when it's time to murder the thing. You fetch a very small, still-burning ember from the hearth and place it in the cavity hole, killing its soul and fusing your tooth to the bone for good. He explains this to me calmly, eyes gleaming, and I'm left speechless. I think of the high-pitched shriek of the nerve being cauterized by the ember, of the lack of anesthetic, by far my favorite modern invention, more than washing machines or cars, anesthetic, and at the same time I feel something instinctual deep inside me respond to this rallying cry. I want to be just like the shepherd, to seem normal but be barbaric, to eat cookies even though I don't own a toothbrush, to cut tiny pieces of ember perfect as diamonds, inlay my teeth with them, and proclaim myself queen. That is just so good. I don't even know how to describe it, but the strange, I think, juxtaposition of images, the really kind of edgy, weird ideas contained there about how this young woman, who, if you know the book, wants to get pregnant, has become, you know, more or less enamored with the way of life of the shepherd who she lives near. It's just really, really incredible, I think. I think any video that I made about writing, and I think the beauty of writing, would be remiss without talking about Cormac McCarthy. Now, you know, if you watch my channel, I'm a critic of McCarthy in all kinds of ways. I think that you know, the number of his books that are truly good is oftentimes overstated, and in part because people kind of get caught up in the image, style, mythology of Cormac McCarthy. But having said that, I have to tell you, I think Blood Meridian contains just some truly beautiful examples of writing, and so I thought I would read one to you, or share one with you here. This is just, you know, a fairly regular passage in Blood Meridian in which McCarthy is discussing the Glanton gang moving from one place to another. They rode down from this country through a deep gorge, clattering over the stones, rifts of cool blue shade. In the dry sand of the arroyo floor, old bones and broken shapes of painted pottery, and graven on the rocks above them pictographs of horse and cougar and turtle, and the mounted Spaniards helmeted and bucklered, and the contemptuous of stone and silence and time itself. Lodged in faults and crevices 100 feet above them were nests of straws and jetsam from old high waters, and the riders could hear the mutter of thunder in some nameless distance, and they kept watch on the narrow shape of the sky overhead for any darkness of impending rain, threading the canyon's close-pressed flanks, the dry white rocks of the dead river floor, round and smooth as arcane eggs. That night they camped in the ruins of an old culture deep in the stone mountains, a small valley with a clear run of water and good grass. Dwellings of mud and stone were walled up beneath an overhanging cliff, and the valley was traced with the work of old acacias. The loose sand in the valley floor was strewn everywhere with pieces of pottery and blackened bits of wood, and it was crossed and recrossed with the tracks of deer and other animals. I just think that the images that he creates there, the run-on sentences, the speed, and difficult for me to read out loud, but the momentum of those sentences in describing the natural world as these men move through it, I think it's just really extraordinary, and I think there's some great writing in that book. So the next book I have on my list is another author that I feature on my channel often, and that's William Trevor. I think William Trevor is just one of the greatest short story writers to ever live in any language. His stories are frequently, or almost all the stories are set in Ireland or involve Irish people. He was an Irish writer. They're set in small towns with small town dramas and things going on, and they oftentimes, I think, reflect kind of the, I don't know, the bitterness, not maybe bitterness, but the sadness, the overhanging kind of sense of, well, sadness or depression that might exist in those places among people whose dreams are not going to quite come true, or who have one dream or one thing interfere with another, and interfere not just with themselves but in their relationship with other people. I usually choose Love and Summer as the book by William Trevor that I give an example of his work and that I like and I think is really, really powerful, in part because recommending Love and Summer is easy because it's a fairly short book. But I thought I would read these passages to you from that. And essentially what we're talking about here are two characters, one named Ellie and one named Florian, who have entered into an affair which is, not an affair sanctioned by marriage. And as with many times is true with Trevor's characters, they have a hard time expressing exactly what they think, and oftentimes things are hidden or kept back. So I thought I would read this section to you. Don't be unhappy, Ellie. She shook her head. She didn't speak. I had to tell you. I know you did. I know. They climbed through ferns and bracken, the bog land dry. They skirted an escarpment because it was a shorter way. A distant Angelus bell chimed faintly in the stillness. He would go, and that he was gone would be her first thought every morning, as her first thought now was that he was here. She would open her eyes and see the pink-washed walls as she saw them now, the sacred picture above the empty grate, her clothes on the chair in the window. He would be gone, as dead as the dead are gone, and that would be there all day, in the kitchen and in the yard, when she brought in anthracite for the Rayburn, when she scalded the churns, when she fed the hens and stacked the turf. It would be there in the fields with her when she stood with her eggs waiting for the presbytery hall door to open, and while Miss Connolty counted out her coins and the man with the deaf aid looked for insulation guards or udder pads. It was there. It would be there while she lay down beside the husband she had married, and while she made his food and cut his bread, and while the old-time music played. I just think that is heartbreaking and beautifully written, and kind of captures so much about the human experience of kind of grief or grieving someone or pre-grieving someone's absence and knowing all the times that you're going to be unhappy or miserable. So I want to include that. And then I also want to talk about Annie Ernaux's book, The Years. The Years was written in French, translated to English by Alyson L. Strayer. And I thought one of the things, this is the only book by Annie Ernaux I've read, but I was really struck by not just the style of the writing, but the style of the book, in which Erneaux is essentially blending world events that took place during her lifetime with her life events and her feelings. One of the most remarkable things I think about the book is the way the writing style changes. When you're talking about world events, it's fairly straightforward and repertorial, and the more personal it gets, the more up to her present life it gets, the more imagistic it becomes, and the more, I think, emotional it becomes. So I just wanted to read a short passage to you from The Years to give you some idea of what the writing's like. And in this passage, she's kind of addressing the problem of writing the book she's actually writing. She would like to assemble the multiple images of herself, separate and discordant, thread them together with the story of her existence, starting with her birth during World War II up until the present day. Therefore, an existence that is singular but also merged with the movements of a generation. Each time she begins, she meets the same obstacles: how to represent the passage of historical time, the changing of things, ideas, and manners in the private life of this woman. How to make the fresco of 45 years coincide with the search for self outside of history, the self of suspended moments transformed into poems she wrote at 20. Her main concern is the choice between I and she. There is something too permanent about I, something shrunken and stifling, whereas she is too exterior and remote. The image she has of her book in non-existent form, of the impression it should leave, is the one she retained from Gone with the Wind, read at age 12, and later from Remembrance of Things Past, and more recently from Life and Fate, an image of light and shadow and streaming over faces. But she hasn't yet discovered how to do this. She awaits, if not a revelation, then a sign, a happenstance, as the Madeleine dipped in tea was for Marcel Proust. Even more than this book, the future is the next man who will make her dreams, buy her new clothes, and wait for a letter, a phone call, a message on the answering machine. Again, even though this doesn't have exactly the kind of thing I was talking about, which requires a lot more reading, I think, to pick up on, it does show her move from kind of this almost clinical description of the problem she's having writing the book to a really personal idea about what will be the next part of the book, which is her next relationship. One of the, famously one of the greatest writers I think in American history is F. Scott Fitzgerald, and when I call him one of the greatest writers in American history, I'm just talking about his ability to write beautiful sentences and scenes. There are lots of those in The Great Gatsby. I'm going to read to you one of the most famous ones, and this is the one you see in the movies all the time, where Gatsby throws the shirts. But I just think it's beautiful in that it reflects, Gatsby's hopes and dreams. And the effect his wealth, his position has on Daisy. So this is at a party, I believe, at which Daisy and Tom Buchanan have come to. Or maybe I think it's when she's just visiting Gatsby's house. Nick is there as well, because there's always Nick there to tell us the story. We went upstairs through period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk and vivid with new flowers, through dressing rooms and pool rooms and bathrooms with sunken baths, intruding into one chamber where a disheveled man in pajamas was doing liver exercises on the floor. It was Mr. Klipspringer, the boarder. I had seen him wandering hungrily about the beach that morning. Finally, we came to Gatsby's own apartment, a bedroom and a bath and an Adams study, where we sat down and drank a glass of some chartreuse he took from a cupboard in the wall. He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Sometimes, too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence none of it was any longer real. Once he nearly toppled down a flight of stairs. His bedroom was the simplest room of all, except where the dresser was garnished with a toilet set of pure dull gold. Daisy took the brush with delight and smoothed her hair, whereupon Gatsby sat down and shaded his eyes and began to laugh. "It's the funniest thing, old sport," he said hilariously. "I can't when I try to." He had passed visibly through 2 states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment and his unreasoning joy, he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwound clock. Recovering himself in a minute, he opened for us 2 hulking patent cabinets, which held his mass suits and dressing gowns and ties and his shirts piled like bricks in stacks a dozen high. "I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends over a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring and fall." He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them one by one before us, shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds, they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. While we admired, he brought more of the soft, rich heap, mounted higher, shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange with monograms of Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strange sound, Daisy bent her head into the shirts and began to cry stormily. So there's, a certain element of overwroughtness there, but I just think the way he describes moving through the house, the real kind of funny bit about finding Klipspringer doing liver exercises in her room, the way Gatsby is taken back by Daisy's delight in brushing her hair with his brush, and then the shirts, kind of the show of wealth, and how beautiful they are, and how it overwhelms Daisy, I think is really just beautifully done. I don't know anybody who's going to disparage Gatsby's Fitzgerald's ability to write a sentence. The last example I want to give is from another one of my favorite writers, and that's Toni Morrison. And I wanted to read this from Sula because I think Sula is in lots of ways, I think, Toni Morrison's most, I want to say sensuous, but I don't necessarily mean that sexually, even though the scene I'm going to read is sexually charged, but just in the use of language and her ability to use language which may not on the surface seem like it should be sensuous in a sensuous way. And I think in lots of ways Sula is one of the most richly realized novels in terms of her characters and location and place and the culture of the place where the story takes place. So this is a scene in which our two characters, Nell and Sula, are going to get ice cream, and in going to get ice cream, they have to walk by the men of the community where they live, older men and younger men. Nell and Sula walked through the valley of eyes, chilled by the wind and heated by the embarrassment of appraising stares. The old men looked at their stalk-like legs, dwelled on the cords in the backs of their knees, and remembered old dance steps they had not done in 20 years. In their lust, which age turned to kindness, they moved their lips as though to stir up the taste of young sweat on tight skin. Pygmy. The words were in all their minds, and one of the young ones, said it aloud, softly but definitively, and there was no mistaking the compliment. His name was Ajax, a 21-year-old pool haunt of sinister beauty. Graceful and economical in every movement, he held a place of envy with men of all ages for his magnificently foul mouth. In fact, he seldom cursed, and the epithets he chose were dull and even harmless. His reputation was derived from the way he handled the words. When he said hell, he hit the H with his lungs, and the impact was greater than the achievement of the most imaginative foul mouth in town. He could say shit with nastiness impossible to imitate. So when he said pig meat, as Nell and Sula passed, they guarded their eyes lest someone see their delight. It was not really Edna Finch's ice cream that made them brave the stretch of those panther eyes. Years later, their own eyes would glaze as they cupped their chins in remembrance of the inchworm smiles, the squatting haunches, the track-rail legs straddling broken chairs, the cream-colored trousers marking with a mere seam the place where mystery curled. Those smooth vanilla crotches invited them. Those lemon-yellow gabardines beckoned them. They moved towards the ice cream parlor like tightrope walkers, as thrilled by the possibility of a slip as by the maintenance of tension and balance. The least sideways glance, the merest toe stub, could pitch them into those creamy haunches spread wide with welcome. Somewhere beneath all that daintiness, chambered in all that neatness, lay the thing that clotted their dreams. Holy cow. I mean, I don't think there are words to describe how wonderful that scene is. The description of the trousers as being vanilla or lemon yellow when the girls are on their way to get ice cream. The sensuous, suggestive, crude nature of some of the things that are said is just immaculately handled, and just, I think, an example of great writing. I feel like in reading all these passages, I've kind of lost my way in what I wanted to say in this video because I got so caught up in what I think is the brilliance of the writing. But I hope that, you know, if you haven't read these writers, you will, that you'll pay attention to the way words fit together, images fit together, the rhythm of sentences, momentum, all those kinds of things. And pay more attention to that, not really when you're writing necessarily, but when you're reading. Because as I've said many times on my channel, one of the things I read for is for great writing, and I think those are all good examples of great writing. Anyway, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.